The courtroom was full of people, yet the silence felt heavier than any noise. A silence that waits, not for justice, but for spectacle. This was not just a divorce case. This was a man's attempt to humiliate his wife in front of everyone. And it was the story of a woman who could speak, but chose silence. If you believe silence means weakness, don't skip this story. Because today, inside this courtroom, silence is about to become the most powerful voice. You are watching Silent Queen Stories, where quiet women write history with dignity. Before we move forward, a small request. Please like this video and subscribe to Silent Queen Stories. It gives us the strength to bring more real and emotional stories to you. Trust me, what's coming next is something you won't want to miss. Her name was Amelia Carter. She was sitting quietly in one corner of the courtroom, hands resting in her lap, eyes lowered to the floor. No expensive dress, no makeup, no dramatic expression. To the people watching, she looked defeated, but to her husband, she was the perfect target. Across from her sat Ryan Carter, an expensive suit, confident posture, and a smile filled with arrogance. For him, this case was not just a legal process. It was his stage, and today he was ready to perform. As the judge entered, everyone stood, then sat back down. The light tap of the gavel silenced the room. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, "you may begin your statement." Ryan stood up slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked forward like a man who already knew the verdict would be in his favor. "Your Honor," Ryan said, his voice confident with a hint of pride, "I'm not here today just for a divorce. I'm here to take my dignity back." A few people in the courtroom sat up straighter. "For years," Ryan continued, "I lived with a woman who was nothing to me. No support, no ambition, no loyalty." Amelia did not move. "She lived off my money," Ryan said, raising his voice, "my success, my name, while pretending to be innocent in front of the world." He turned his head and looked directly at Amelia. "But silence is not innocence," Ryan said. "Silence is often proof of guilt." A soft murmur spread through the courtroom. Ryan's lawyer handed him a file. Ryan opened it dramatically. "I have messages," he said. "Screenshots, photos, proof that my wife is not who she pretends to be." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter, proceed carefully." "Oh, absolutely," Ryan smiled. "I'm only speaking the truth." He began reading the messages. Half-truths, taken out of context, meant only to humiliate. People started whispering. Some looked at Amelia with judgment, but Amelia remained silent. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered, "Amelia, we can respond. You should speak." She gently shook her head in refusal. Ryan laughed. "See?" he said. "Even now she has nothing to say." He stepped forward and added, "Tell me, Amelia, are you finally feeling ashamed today, or do you still think silence will save you?" This time Amelia looked up. There was no anger in her eyes, no tears, only calm. For a brief moment, Ryan felt uneasy. Then he turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I request the court to officially acknowledge that this woman's behavior damaged my public image." The judge looked at Amelia. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to respond?" The entire courtroom froze. Amelia stood up slowly. Every movement was controlled. "No, Your Honor," she said softly. "I don't wish to say anything." A wave of surprise moved through the room. Ryan smiled again. Just as expected. Amelia sat back down, but in the back row of the courtroom an elderly man had been watching everything. He had entered quietly, no attention, simple clothes, a cane in his hand, and eyes locked on one person, Ryan. He was Amelia's father. He had watched his daughter being humiliated in silence, but he knew the right moment had not arrived yet. The judge said, "We will now proceed to final remarks." Ryan took a deep breath. Victory felt close. Amelia closed her eyes, and the man in the back row leaned forward. The courtroom was about to hear a truth. Silence is not weakness. Silence waits. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced at the clock. The courtroom felt tighter now, like the walls themselves were listening. Ryan stood confidently, hands resting on the podium, waiting for the final strike that would seal his victory. But something felt different. The silence no longer belonged to him. Ryan cleared his throat. Your Honor, I believe the facts are clear. My wife has chosen not to defend herself. That alone says everything. A few heads nodded in agreement. Ryan continued, I built my life with hard work. I built my reputation from nothing, and all I ask today is to walk away without being dragged down by someone who never deserved my name. He paused, then added casually, I'm sure the court understands. The judge looked thoughtful. He glanced once more at Amelia. She sat perfectly still, her breathing slow, calm, as if she was not on trial at all. Ryan's lawyer leaned over and whispered, Push a little more, the judge is almost there. Ryan nodded. He turned back toward Amelia, this time with sharper eyes. You know, he said, I gave you everything, a house, a name, a lifestyle. And what did you give me back? He didn't wait for an answer. Nothing. A faint gasp escaped from somewhere in the crowd. Ryan smiled again. I carried you, I protected you, and you hid behind silence like it was some kind of shield. Amelia didn't react. That bothered him. Ryan tightened his jaw. Say something, he snapped suddenly. At least once in your life. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Carter, control your tone. Ryan stepped back, forcing another smile. Apologies, Your Honor. Passion can do that. But inside, something was slipping. He had expected tears. He had expected anger. He had expected Amelia to break, but she remained untouched. In the back row, the elderly man watched closely, his grip tightened around his cane, not in anger, but in restraint. He had waited years teaching his daughter one lesson above all others. Never waste your voice when silence will expose the truth for you. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Carter, do you have anything further to add before we conclude? Ryan hesitated for half a second. Then he nodded. Yes. One last thing. He turned to the courtroom. I want it on record that my wife's silence today proves she has nothing to deny. No explanation, no defense, just guilt. He looked satisfied. Ryan sat down. The judge took a breath. Very well. The court will. Your Honor. The voice came softly. Not Amelia's. The entire courtroom turned. The elderly man in the back row had stood up. For the first time, people really looked at him. Simple suit, calm face, no rush in his movements. The judge frowned slightly. Sir, this is not your case. I know, the man replied respectfully. But I believe the court will allow me 1 minute. Ryan turned around, irritated. Who is this? The man did not look at Ryan. He looked only at the judge. I won't take long, he said. I've spent my whole life respecting courts like this, and I wouldn't stand if it wasn't necessary. The judge studied him. Something about the man felt grounded, familiar. State your name, the judge said. The man paused, then spoke clearly. My name is Thomas Hale. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Ryan's lawyer stiffened. Someone in the audience whispered, Did he say Thomas Hale? Ryan frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Yet, Thomas Hale continued calmly, I am Amelia Carter's father. Ryan scoffed. Of course you are. But the judge didn't smile. The judge's expression changed, subtly. Mr. Hale, the judge said slowly, are you formerly Justice Hale? Thomas nodded once. Yes, Your Honor, retired. The room froze. Ryan's face lost color. Justice Hale. A name that carried decades of weight. A man known for integrity, for dismantling powerful liars in quiet courtrooms. Ryan swallowed. I didn't come here to defend my daughter, Thomas said. She doesn't need defense. He turned slightly toward Amelia. She chose silence, and I respect that. Then he faced the judge again. I only came to correct one thing. The courtroom leaned in. Silence, Thomas said, is not an admission of guilt. He paused. It is often the refusal to argue with someone who has already exposed themselves. Ryan stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate. The judge raised his hand. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Ryan hesitated, then sat. Thomas spoke gently, but every word landed hard. "Mr. Carter claims my daughter lived off his success, that she contributed nothing, that her silence today proves guilt." He looked directly at Ryan for the first time. "My daughter helped build what you proudly stand on." Ryan laughed nervously. "That's absurd." Thomas didn't react. "Every investment you made," he said, "was reviewed by her. Every contract you signed," she read, quietly, "without credit, without your name attached to hers." Ryan shook his head. "You have no proof." Thomas smiled. "I do." He reached into his jacket, but did not pull anything out yet. Amelia finally looked at her father. Their eyes met. He gave her the smallest nod. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, continue." Thomas took a breath. "The court will soon see," he said, "that silence was never her weakness. It was her choice." And Ryan suddenly realized this case was no longer under his control. The courtroom felt completely different now. What once sounded like whispers of judgment had turned into heavy, uncomfortable silence. All eyes were fixed on Thomas Hale, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. Ryan shifted in his seat. The confidence he had walked in with was slowly slipping away. Thomas reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out a thin folder and placed it gently on the table in front of the judge. "These are not rumors," Thomas said calmly. "They are records." The judge motioned for the clerk to take the folder. Ryan's lawyer stood up immediately. "Your Honor, we haven't had a chance to review any of this. This is completely unexpected." The judge nodded. "I understand, but I will review what is relevant." Ryan leaned toward his lawyer and whispered sharply, "What is this? Why didn't we know about this?" His lawyer didn't answer. He was staring at the documents with growing concern. Thomas continued speaking, his voice steady. "My daughter never asked for credit. She never asked for recognition. She believed marriage was partnership, not competition." Ryan scoffed. "That's a nice story, but stories don't change facts." Thomas looked at him, calm, unmoved. "No," he said, "but facts change lies." The judge flipped through the pages slowly. The room waited. "These documents," Thomas explained, "include email records, financial reviews, and advisory notes, all written by Amelia." Ryan laughed nervously. "She doesn't even work in finance." Thomas tilted his head slightly. "She doesn't need to work in finance to understand it. She was trained to see what others overlook." Ryan opened his mouth to interrupt. The judge raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, enough." Ryan froze. The judge looked back at the folder. "These emails are dated years back. Before several of Mr. Carter's major business expansions." Thomas nodded. "That's correct." The judge adjusted his glasses. "And these recommendations, many of them were followed." "Yes," Thomas replied, quietly. Ryan's breathing became shallow. "This is ridiculous," Ryan said, standing again. "Even if she helped occasionally, that doesn't excuse her behavior." Amelia remained seated, silent. The judge turned to Ryan. "Mr. Carter, you accused your wife of contributing nothing. That accusation is now questionable." Ryan clenched his jaw. Thomas spoke again. "My daughter stayed silent today because she knew something important." He paused. "When people are busy humiliating someone else, they reveal more about themselves than their target ever could." A few people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Ryan's lawyer whispered, "Sit down, please." Ryan dropped back into his seat, face tight. Thomas turned slightly toward Amelia again. "You taught yourself patience," he said softly. "I'm proud of that." Amelia's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, is there anything else the court should consider?" Thomas nodded once. "Yes." He took another document from the folder. "This," he said, "is a signed agreement." Ryan's head snapped up. "What agreement?" Thomas didn't answer him. "This agreement," Thomas continued, "was created during Mr. Carter's first major financial crisis. A crisis the public never knew about. The Judd." GE's eyebrows rose. "Go on." "Amelia used her personal inheritance as collateral," Thomas said. "Not for ownership, not for control, but to protect her husband's failing company." The courtroom gasped. Ryan stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's a lie." Thomas looked at him calmly. "Is it?" The judge examined the document carefully. "This is notarized," the judge said, "and legally binding." Ryan's lawyer sank back into his seat. Ryan's face turned pale. I didn't know," Ryan muttered. Thomas replied quietly, "That's because she never wanted you to feel small." Silence swallowed the room. The judge leaned back slowly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you described your wife as a burden." He paused, "But it appears she was the foundation." Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Amelia finally lifted her head. She didn't look at Ryan. She looked straight ahead. Thomas took a step back. "I've said enough," he said. "The rest belongs to the court." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Thomas returned to his seat beside Amelia. Ryan sat frozen. For the first time, the spotlight was no longer on her silence. It was on his lies. And the courtroom was starting to see the truth. Ryan's mind raced as the weight of the courtroom pressed down on him. The faces that once watched Amelia with judgment were now turned toward him with quiet suspicion. He could feel it slipping. Control, image, power. He stood again, forcing a breath into his lungs. "Your Honor," he said quickly, "this is turning into a character assassination." The judge looked at him steadily. "You initiated the character discussion, Mr. Carter." Ryan swallowed. "Even if my wife helped at some point, that doesn't erase years of emotional distance, silence, disconnection." Thomas remained seated, hands folded on his cane. Ryan turned toward Amelia. "You never spoke, never shared anything. How was I supposed to know what you felt?" Amelia did not respond. Her silence unsettled him more than any argument could have. The judge addressed Amelia gently. "Mrs. Carter, you are not required to speak, but if you wish to, the court will listen." Amelia's hands tightened briefly in her lap, then relaxed. She remained seated. Ryan exhaled sharply. "See? This is exactly what I mean." The judge didn't reply. Instead, he turned to the clerk. "Read the financial summary aloud." The clerk began, voice steady. "Based on the documents submitted, multiple financial risks were identified and mitigated through advisory recommendations authored by Amelia Carter." Each sentence landed like a blow. Ryan's lawyer closed his eyes. Ryan stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The clerk continued. "Several of Mr. Carter's current assets would not exist without these interventions." The courtroom was silent again. Ryan shook his head slowly. "This is unbelievable." Thomas spoke without standing. "What's unbelievable is how easily support is forgotten. An ego takes over," Ryan snapped. "You've said enough." The judge raised his hand. "No, he hasn't." Ryan froze. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, earlier today you claimed your wife damaged your public image." Ryan nodded weakly. "And yet," the judge continued, "every damaging statement has come from you." Ryan opened his mouth, closed it again. The judge turned toward Amelia. "Mrs. Carter, the court recognizes your restraint." Amelia looked up briefly. Her expression remained calm. The judge continued. "Silence is not avoidance. In this case, it appears to be dignity." A quiet shift moved through the room. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He leaned toward his lawyer. "Fix this," he whispered. His lawyer shook his head slightly. Ryan stood again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Your Honor, I was under stress. I spoke out of frustration." The judge studied him. "Stress does not justify humiliation." Ryan's shoulders sagged. Thomas finally stood once more. "May I say one final thing?" The judge nodded. Briefly, Thomas looked at Ryan. "You asked her to speak." He paused. "She chose peace." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Peace? Or hiding?" Thomas didn't raise his voice. "Peace is knowing you don't need to defend the truth. It stands on its own." Amelia took a slow breath. She felt the shift. For years she had carried weight silently. Now the weight was moving. The judge adjusted his papers. "The court will take a short recess before issuing a decision." The gavel tapped. People began whispering. Ryan sat alone, staring at the table in front of him. Amelia remained still. Thomas placed his hand gently over hers. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Because silence had already said everything. The recess ended, but the tension stayed behind. People returned to their seats quietly, as if afraid to disturb whatever truth had settled in the room. Ryan sat rigid, his earlier confidence completely drained. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles pale. Amelia returned to her seat without looking at him. The judge re-entered and adjusted his robe. "We will continue." Ryan cleared his throat, then leaned toward his lawyer. "We need to say something. Anything." His lawyer met his eyes. "Sometimes silence is safer." Ryan almost laughed. The judge began. "Before this court reaches a decision, I want to address something directly." He looked at Ryan. "You described your wife as emotionally absent." Ryan nodded slowly. "But absence," the judge continued, "is not always neglect. Sometimes it is endurance." Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. The judge turned toward Amelia. "Mrs. Carter, the court has reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Hale." Amelia's posture remained composed. "It is clear," the judge said, "that you played a significant role in sustaining your husband's professional success." Ryan's breath caught. "And yet," the judge continued, "you asked for no recognition." The courtroom felt heavy again. Ryan stood suddenly. "Your Honor, if she did all this, why didn't she ever say anything? Why sit in silence for years?" The judge looked at him calmly. "That question," he said, "is not legal, it is personal." Ryan faltered. Thomas watched quietly, his expression steady. The judge continued, "This court does not punish restraint, it recognizes it." Ryan sank back into his seat. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, humiliation is a choice, and today you chose it." A sharp inhale rippled through the room. Ryan's voice cracked. "I didn't think—" "That," the judge interrupted, "is clear." Silence followed. Amelia's fingers tightened once more, then relaxed. For the first time she felt it. Relief. The judge adjusted the documents in front of him. "The court will rule shortly." Ryan's eyes darted around the room. He leaned toward Amelia, whispering urgently, "Why didn't you ever fight back?" She did not turn to him. Thomas spoke softly, not looking at Ryan. "Because fighting requires proving something. She had nothing to prove." Ryan laughed weakly. "So this is it? Everyone just believes her now." The judge spoke again. "Belief is earned, Mr. Carter, and today you earned doubt." Ryan closed his eyes. The judge stood. "This court recognizes the emotional restraint demonstrated by Mrs. Carter as a sign of composure, not guilt." A pause. "Final judgment will now be delivered." Amelia straightened slightly. Ryan's heart pounded. D. The courtroom leaned forward together. Whatever happened next would not just end a marriage. It would define who walked out with dignity and who did not. The judge paused before speaking, letting the weight of the moment settle. No one moved. Even breathing felt loud. After reviewing all statements and evidence, the judge said slowly, "This court has reached its decision." Ryan's hands trembled slightly. He tried to steady them by pressing his palms flat against the table. Amelia sat upright. Calm. Ready. "The court finds no evidence," the judge continued, "that Mrs. Carter acted with malice, deception, or intent to harm her husband's reputation." Ryan's jaw tightened. In contrast, the judge said, "The court finds multiple instances where Mr. Carter used this proceeding to publicly demean and humiliate his spouse." A quiet shock moved through the room. Ryan stood. "Your Honor." The judge raised a firm hand. "Sit down." Ryan froze, then slowly lowered himself into his chair. "The court therefore rules," the judge said, "that Mrs. Carter is entitled to a fair division of assets with full consideration of her documented contributions." Ryan's breath caught sharply. "And," the judge added, "this court formally rejects Mr. Carter's claim that his wife damaged his public image." Ryan stared ahead, eyes unfocused. The judge turned toward Amelia. "Mrs. Carter, the court recognizes your restraint, your composure, and your dignity throughout these proceedings." Amelia nodded once. No smile, no tears, just acknowledgement. Ryan whispered, almost to himself, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Thomas watched him quietly. The judge continued, "This case stands as a reminder that silence, when chosen with integrity, is not weakness." The gavel struck. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed. People began to rise, murmurs filling the room. Some glanced at Amelia with new respect. Others avoided Ryan's eyes. Ryan remained seated, frozen. Amelia stood slowly. For the first time she looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with closure. She turned away. Thomas stepped beside her. They walked together toward the exit. Ryan finally found his voice. "Amelia." She paused, but did not turn. "I never knew," he said, desperation creeping in. "You should have told me." Thomas spoke gently. "She did. Just not with words." Amelia took another step. Ryan's voice cracked. "I lost everything." Thomas looked back at him calmly. "No. You gave it away." The courtroom doors closed behind Amelia and her father. Ryan sat alone, surrounded by noise, drowned in silence. The hallway outside the courtroom felt brighter, quieter. Amelia took a slow breath as the doors closed behind her. For the first time in years, her chest didn't feel tight. People passed by. Some recognized her, some whispered, but none of it mattered anymore. Thomas walked beside her, steady and calm. "You did well," he said softly. Amelia shook her head. "I didn't do anything." Thomas smiled gently. "Exactly." They stepped outside into the open air. Amelia paused, letting the light touch her face. It felt unfamiliar, like a beginning. Inside the courtroom, Ryan still hadn't moved. His lawyer packed up the files in silence. "We should go," he said quietly. Ryan stared at the empty chair where Amelia had been sitting. "She didn't even fight," he muttered. "She didn't even try." His lawyer hesitated. "Sometimes the fight isn't loud," Ryan scoffed. "Then what was it?" The lawyer met his eyes. "A mirror." Ryan looked away. Later that evening, news spread quickly, not in headlines, but in conversations. People talked about the case, about the woman who said almost nothing, about the man who said too much. Ryan scrolled through his phone alone. Messages went unanswered. Calls stopped coming in. For the first time, there was no one to blame. Amelia sat in a quiet room that night, a cup of tea warming her hands. She stared out the window, not thinking about the past, but not afraid of it either. Thomas sat across from her. "You know," he said, "people will ask why you stayed silent." Amelia nodded. "They already have. And what will you tell them?" She thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. That peace was louder than anger. Thomas nodded. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, Amelia felt stillness, not emptiness, but strength. She didn't win because Ryan lost. She won because she never lost herself. More. Ning came softly. Amelia woke up without the familiar weight in her chest. No racing thoughts, no rehearsed arguments. Just quiet. She stood by the window, watching the city wake up. For years she had measured her days by someone else's mood, someone else's voice. Now there was only her own. Thomas joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "What will you do now?" he asked gently. Amelia took the cup and thought for a moment. "Live," she said, "without explaining myself." Thomas smiled. "That's more than enough." Across the city, Ryan sat alone in his apartment. The silence there felt different. It wasn't calm. It wasn't chosen. It pressed against him. He replayed the courtroom in his mind. Every word, every pause, every moment he thought he was winning. He realized something too late. Amelia never needed to defeat him. He had done that himself. Days passed. Then weeks. Amelia didn't rush into anything new. She took walks, read books she had once set aside, spoke only when she wanted to. People began reaching out, not to ask questions, but to listen. Some said, "I wish I had your strength." Amelia always answered the same way. "Strength isn't loud." Ryan tried to rebuild. Apologies followed him, but none reached her. And for the first time he understood what true silence felt like. Not the kind that protects, the kind that reflects. One evening, Amelia stood again by the window. She wasn't thinking about revenge or justice. She was thinking about peace, and how quietly it arrives when you stop begging to be heard. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that dignity doesn't need noise, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, do you believe silence is weakness or strength? We read every comment here on Silent Queen Stories, and your voice matters, especially when it's calm, honest, and real. If you stayed till the end, thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Silent Queen Stories for more powerful emotional stories that stay with you long after the video ends, because sometimes the strongest voice is the one that doesn't shout.